I watched in horror as VP Jennifer Sullivan waved my classified files in the air like party favors. The Department of Homeland Security Regional Office conference room fell silent as she announced to the entire senior staff meeting that she wanted to share my boring government tasks for everyone's amusement. 23 department heads erupted in laughter as Jennifer began reading aloud my meticulous notes about potential security vulnerabilities at local infrastructure sites. My stomach dropped. These weren't routine paperwork. These were highly sensitive terrorism threat assessments. My phone buzzed with an urgent alert. The laughter echoing around the mahogany conference table felt like nails scraping against my soul. Jennifer's voice dripped with condescension as she continued her performance, holding my carefully documented analysis of regional power grid weaknesses like a comedian's prop. "Listen to this gem," she announced, adjusting her designer glasses. "Brett here thinks someone might actually want to attack the Riverside electrical substation because it has insufficient perimeter security and outdated access controls." Can you imagine? More chuckles rippled through the room. Assistant Director Frank Morrison wiped tears from his eyes. Department heads exchanged knowing glances about the paranoid little analyst who took everything too seriously. But they had no idea who I really was. 3 years ago, I wasn't just another Georgetown graduate with a security studies degree. 6 months after my summa cum laude graduation, FBI Assistant Director Patricia Hayes approached me in a coffee shop near DuPont Circle. She slid a business card across the small table and changed my life with 8 words. "We need someone inside Homeland Security immediately." The next 18 months disappeared into a carefully constructed alternate identity. Brett Anderson, the quiet analyst who kept her head down and filed meticulous reports that nobody bothered reading. The woman who arrived early, stayed late, and never caused trouble. The perfect, invisible employee. Except I wasn't invisible to everyone. My handler, Agent Michael Torres, had contacted me through our encrypted messaging system just minutes before this meeting began. His message was urgent. "Chatter indicates acceleration of timeline. What's your status on infrastructure targets?" The files Jennifer was now mocking contained evidence of a sophisticated domestic terrorism cell that had spent 2 years planning coordinated attacks on regional infrastructure. Those boring documents represented months of dangerous intelligence gathering, tracking financial transfers through shell companies, documenting suspicious maintenance contracts, and mapping connections between seemingly unrelated entities. Every page Jennifer waved contained classified information that could get people killed. My father's voice echoed in my memory. Colonel Robert Anderson, retired. Air Force intelligence had taught me from childhood that sometimes the hardest decisions require the most courage. "Integrity isn't about doing what's easy," he used to say during our evening walks around our suburban Maryland neighborhood. "It's about doing what's right when nobody's watching." I had been watching for 18 months, and what I saw terrified me. The Thompson Valley Dam supplied clean water to 200,000 residents across 3 counties. The Riverside electrical substation powered critical infrastructure for the entire metropolitan region. The natural gas distribution center near downtown could level 6 city blocks if properly targeted. Each location appeared in my reports as a potential vulnerability requiring immediate security upgrades. Jennifer seemed to find my thoroughness hilarious. "Oh, and here's my personal favorite," she continued, her voice rising with theatrical flair. "Brett believes the Thompson Valley Dam needs enhanced surveillance protocols and restricted access zones because maintenance workers might pose security risks." Maintenance workers. The people who keep our lights on. She had no idea that one of those maintenance workers, David Hartwell, was sitting 30 feet away in the back row of this very meeting. David, whose brother-in-law had received $60,000 in unexplained payments from Cascade Consulting Solutions, a shell company registered in Delaware with no legitimate business operations. David, who had requested overtime shifts, specifically during periods when security cameras were offline for system updates. David, who was right now discreetly photographing the classified documents with his smartphone, while Jennifer provided the perfect distraction. My chest tightened as I watched him capture image after image of my carefully gathered intelligence. Each photo represented a potential death sentence for civilians whose only crime was living normal American lives in a region targeted by domestic terrorists. Agent Torres had trained me for moments like this. "The mission always comes first," he had said during a clandestine meeting in Rock Creek Park 6 months ago. "Your cover identity exists to serve a larger purpose. When that purpose is threatened, you act." But acting meant destroying 18 months of carefully constructed infiltration. It meant revealing my true identity to colleagues who had dismissed me as a nervous perfectionist. It meant potentially compromising future operations and losing the trust I had built within the organization. It also meant preventing mass casualties. Jennifer turned to her next victim, Director Carl Washington, from the Transportation Security Administration. "Carl, you'll love this one. Our dear Brett thinks the subway tunnels need additional monitoring because underground infrastructure presents unique vulnerabilities to coordinated attack scenarios." Can you believe we're paying someone to worry about imaginary subway terrorists? Carl laughed so hard he nearly spilled his coffee. Maybe Brett's been watching too many action movies. The room erupted again. 23 senior officials, each responsible for protecting thousands of American lives, treating legitimate security concerns like entertainment. Their dismissive laughter felt like a betrayal of every principle I had sworn to uphold. My phone buzzed again. Another encrypted message from Torres. "Reports indicate possible advancement of operational timeline. Confirm status immediately." I stared at the device in my lap, knowing that my next decision would define not only my career, but potentially the safety of everyone I had sworn to protect. The secure alert function waited for my activation, a digital trigger that would transform this humiliating moment into something far more serious. Jennifer's voice cut through my thoughts. "And the best part is, Brett actually thinks someone should take these reports seriously. As if domestic terrorists are sitting around planning elaborate infrastructure attacks like some kind of movie villains." The irony was unbearable. They were sitting around planning exactly that. And one of them was in this room photographing classified intelligence, while the person responsible for protecting it was being publicly humiliated for doing her job. I watched David slide his phone into his jacket pocket, having captured every page of my painstakingly assembled threat assessment. In approximately 10 minutes, those images would be transmitted to encrypted servers, controlled by people who wanted to kill Americans. The attack timeline that had taken 2 years to develop would suddenly accelerate to days or possibly hours. Unless I stopped it, my finger hovered over the emergency alert icon on my phone. Activating it would trigger Operation Safeguard, a federal response protocol designed for exactly this type of intelligence compromise. Federal agents would arrive within minutes. The building would enter lockdown. Every person in this room would be detained and investigated, including David Hartwell, whose connection to the terrorist cell would finally be exposed. But it would also mean the end of everything I had worked to build. Jennifer's mockery continued, but my attention had shifted entirely to David Hartwell. Sitting in the back row of the conference room, the facilities coordinator appeared focused on his tablet, occasionally glancing up to smile at Jennifer's performance. To everyone else, he looked like another bored government employee enduring another pointless meeting. I knew better. 2 months ago, I had discovered that David's sister was married to Anthony Walsh, an unemployed construction worker who had somehow acquired a new pickup truck, a boat, and a down payment for a house despite being out of work for 8 months. Financial records showed that Anthony's sudden prosperity coincided with payments from Cascade Consulting Solutions, the same shell company that had been funneling money to other individuals with access to critical infrastructure. David wasn't just photographing my files out of curiosity. He was documenting intelligence that would allow his associates to refine their attack plans and identify additional vulnerabilities I had discovered. Brett even suggests that we conduct comprehensive background checks on all maintenance contractors. Jennifer continued, holding up another page. Because apparently the people who fix our heating systems might secretly be dangerous criminals. The room's laughter felt increasingly hollow as I watched David's fingers move across his phone screen. Each swipe represented another classified document being transmitted to unknown recipients. My 18 months of careful investigation was being weaponized in real time. Agent Torres had briefed me extensively on the cell's methodology. They specialized in patient intelligence gathering spending years, identifying vulnerabilities before striking. Their financial network included at least 7 shell companies spread across 4 states. Their membership consisted primarily of American citizens with legitimate jobs and clean backgrounds, making them nearly impossible to detect through conventional screening. Nearly impossible, but not completely impossible. My breakthrough had come 6 weeks ago when I noticed a pattern in maintenance schedules across all 3 target locations. Routine inspections and repairs were consistently requested during the same narrow time windows when security protocols were temporarily relaxed. The correlation was subtle enough to escape casual notice, but significant enough to indicate coordination. David Hartwell was the common denominator. As facilities coordinator, he had access to security schedules across multiple departments. He knew exactly when cameras would be offline, when guard rotations created brief coverage gaps, and when maintenance access would be least scrutinized. Jennifer turned another page, oblivious to the national security crisis unfolding 30 feet away. "Oh, this is rich." Brett actually recommends installing motion sensors around the natural gas distribution center because she's worried about unauthorized personnel gaining access to sensitive areas. Motion sensors, like we're protecting Fort Knox instead of a utility building. Director Morrison shook his head with exaggerated disbelief. "Where does she come up with this stuff?" I knew exactly where I came up with it. 3 months of surveillance photographs showing David's truck parked near the facility during off hours. Security camera footage of him entering restricted areas using access codes that should have been revoked months earlier. Financial records linking his family to payments from the same sources funding other suspected cell members. But David wasn't working alone. My investigation had identified at least 4 other individuals with similar access patterns and financial connections. Sarah Beth Collins, a computer systems administrator with the Water Authority; James Fletcher, a telecommunications technician with access to emergency communication networks; Rachel Price, an accountant who processed contractor payments across multiple agencies. Each person maintained their regular job while providing intelligence to the larger network. Each appeared to be a model employee with no obvious red flags. Each had been carefully recruited and positioned to maximize their usefulness to the eventual attack plan. Jennifer's voice grew more theatrical. And here's the crown jewel of Brett's paranoid fantasies. She actually suggests that we might be dealing with a coordinated threat involving multiple government agencies. Multiple agencies. Can you imagine the level of delusion required to believe that domestic terrorists could infiltrate our security systems? The irony was staggering. Jennifer was literally describing the exact threat that my investigation had uncovered while dismissing it as impossible. Her institutional arrogance had blinded her to the sophisticated reality of modern domestic terrorism. My phone vibrated with another message from Torres. Intelligence indicates imminent operational window. Need immediate assessment of current threat level. I stared at the encrypted text, understanding that my handler was asking whether I believed an attack was about to happen. Based on David's urgent photography of my files, The answer was almost certainly yes. The cell had been waiting for specific intelligence about security vulnerabilities before finalizing their plans. My detailed assessments provided exactly what they needed: precise information about guard schedules, camera locations, access procedures, and response protocols for all 3 target sites. With that information, they could synchronize attacks to maximize damage while minimizing their exposure to law enforcement interdiction. The Thompson Valley Dam could be compromised during the 15-minute window when security cameras switched to backup systems. The electrical substation's perimeter could be breached during the night shift's meal break. The natural gas facility could be accessed using maintenance codes that weren't scheduled for rotation until next month. Each vulnerability had been carefully documented in my reports as a problem requiring immediate attention. Instead of triggering corrective action, those reports were now being treated as entertainment, while the very person who could exploit those weaknesses sat photographing them. I watched David discreetly forward the images through an encrypted messaging app. Within minutes, multiple cell members would have access to intelligence that took me 18 months to gather. Their 2-year preparation phase was about to conclude with devastating effectiveness. Jennifer flipped to another section of my analysis. Brett even warns about social engineering tactics designed to compromise personnel through personal relationships. She seems to think foreign agents might actually try to manipulate our employees by pretending to be romantic interests. How paranoid can one person get? Director Washington nearly choked on his coffee. That sounds like the plot of a bad spy movie. The comment triggered nervous laughter throughout the room, but I noticed something else. A brief flash of discomfort crossed Jennifer's face before she resumed her theatrical performance. It lasted less than 2 seconds, but I had been trained to notice micro-expressions that indicated emotional stress. Jennifer's reaction suggested that the social engineering section had struck closer to home than she wanted to admit. I pulled up my mental file on Jennifer's personal life. Recently divorced, living alone, active on professional networking sites, frequently posting about social events and travel. The perfect target for a sophisticated social engineering campaign designed to exploit loneliness and professional insecurity. My stomach dropped as another piece of the puzzle clicked into place. David wasn't the only insider threat in this room. The realization hit me like cold water. Jennifer's dismissive attitude toward security protocols wasn't just institutional arrogance. It was potentially the result of systematic manipulation designed to undermine legitimate threat assessments. I had no more time to analyze the situation. David finished forwarding the photographs and slipped his phone back into his jacket. In approximately 10 minutes, those images would reach their intended recipients. The terrorist cell would begin implementing attack plans based on intelligence I had spent 18 months gathering. Hundreds, possibly thousands of people would die because I had hesitated to act. My father's voice echoed again. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's doing what's right, despite being afraid. I activated the emergency alert. The secure notification transmitted instantly to the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force headquarters. My phone screen flashed with a confirmation message. Operation Safeguard initiated. Federal response incoming. Maintain position. I slipped the device back into my pocket and waited. Jennifer continued her performance oblivious to what I had just set in motion. And the absolute pinnacle of Brett's conspiracy theories is this recommendation for enhanced background investigations of senior personnel. She actually thinks terrorists might try to compromise people in positions of authority. Can you imagine anything more ridiculous? The timing was almost perfect. As Jennifer finished her sentence, the building's fire alarm system activated with a piercing electronic wail. But instead of the familiar evacuation tone, the speakers crackled with an automated announcement that made every person in the room freeze. Attention! This facility is now under federal security lockdown. All personnel must remain in their current locations. Do not attempt to leave the building. Federal agents are responding to a national security incident. Remain calm and follow all instructions from law enforcement personnel. The color drained from Jennifer's face as she looked around the conference room in confusion. Director Morrison stood up from his chair, then sat back down as the implications of the announcement registered. David Hartwell reached for his phone, but it was too late. The conference room doors burst open simultaneously as federal agents in tactical gear stormed inside. 6 men and women in dark suits and body armor spread throughout the room, weapons drawn but pointed safely downward. Federal agents, nobody move. Keep your hands visible and remain seated. Agent Michael Torres entered behind the tactical team, his familiar face now cold and professional. He surveyed the room with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this before his gaze, briefly meeting mine before moving on without acknowledgement. Jennifer found her voice first. What is the meaning of this? I demand to know why federal agents are interrupting a routine departmental meeting. Torres stepped forward, his badge clearly visible on his suit jacket. Ma'am, this facility has been placed under federal security lockdown due to the compromise of classified material related to national security threats. I'm Special Agent Michael Torres, FBI Joint Terrorism Task Force. Classified material. Jennifer's voice rose to nearly a shriek. These are routine department files, boring infrastructure reports. There's nothing classified about maintenance schedules and security procedures. Torres's expression didn't change. Ma'am, the documents you were discussing contain intelligence gathered during an active federal investigation into domestic terrorism threats targeting critical infrastructure. Those documents are classified at the secret level and marked accordingly. Every head in the room turned to stare at the pages scattered across the conference table. For the first time, people began reading the classification markings that Jennifer had ignored during her performance. Director Morrison's voice was barely a whisper. Secret classification. But Brett is just a departmental analyst. How could she have access to secret-level intelligence? Torres looked directly at me for the first time since entering the room. Ms. Anderson has been operating under deep cover for the past 18 months as part of a federal counter-terrorism investigation. The documents being discussed contain evidence of an imminent domestic terrorism plot targeting regional infrastructure. The silence in the room was absolute. I watched as my colleagues processed the information. The quiet analyst they had dismissed and ignored for over a year was actually a federal investigator working to prevent terrorist attacks. The paranoid conspiracy theories Jennifer had been mocking were legitimate intelligence assessments based on extensive undercover work. Agent Torres continued his explanation, while federal cyber specialists began collecting electronic devices from every person in the room. Based on surveillance conducted during this meeting, at least one individual present has transmitted classified information to unauthorized recipients with suspected ties to domestic terrorism networks. David Hartwell's face went completely white. He made a desperate attempt to reach for his phone, but the agent standing behind his chair was faster. David Andrew Hartwell, you're under arrest for violation of the Espionage Act conspiracy to commit terrorism and transmission of classified information to unauthorized recipients. The agent's voice was calm and professional as he placed handcuffs on the facility's coordinator. Jennifer stared in shock as David was led from the room. This is impossible. David works in facilities management. He schedules maintenance requests and orders office supplies. How could he be involved in terrorism? Torres answered, while federal cyber specialists began analyzing the contents of David's phone. Mr. Hartwell has been under surveillance for the past 2 months after financial intelligence indicated connections between his extended family and shell companies used to fund domestic terrorism activities. The intelligence gathered by Agent Anderson provided the evidence necessary to confirm those suspicions. The room erupted in whispered conversations as people struggled to understand how their routine government office had become the center of a federal terrorism investigation. I remained silent, watching my 18 months of careful work finally come together. The patient surveillance, the meticulous documentation, the countless hours of analysis had led to this moment. David's arrest would provide federal investigators with direct access to the cell's communication networks and operational planning. But Torres wasn't finished. Ladies and gentlemen, we have reason to believe that the compromise of classified intelligence extends beyond the individual who has been arrested. This investigation has uncovered evidence of a sophisticated foreign influence operation targeting federal employees through personal relationships and social engineering tactics. Jennifer's face went completely pale. Her hands began trembling as Torres continued his briefing. We have identified multiple cases where federal employees with access to sensitive information have been systematically targeted through fake romantic relationships designed to exploit personal vulnerabilities and undermine security protocols. The pieces of Jennifer's personal life suddenly fell into place with devastating clarity. Her recent relationship with Ryan Mitchell, whom she had met through a professional networking app. His persistent questions about her work, his encouragement to be more relaxed about security procedures, his subtle undermining of her confidence in departmental threat assessments. Jennifer's dismissive attitude toward my work hadn't been simple arrogance. It had been the result of systematic psychological manipulation designed to create security vulnerabilities within the federal government. Torres looked directly at Jennifer. Ms. Sullivan, we're going to need to discuss your personal relationships over the past 6 months, particularly your interactions with an individual identifying himself as Ryan Mitchell. Jennifer collapsed back into her chair, the full weight of her situation finally registering. The confident, mocking tone that had dominated the meeting was replaced by quiet horror as she began to understand how completely she had been deceived. Jennifer's hands shook as she stared at Agent Torres, her professional composure completely shattered. The realization that her personal life had been systematically exploited was written across her face in devastating clarity. Ryan isn't real, she whispered more to herself than to anyone else in the room. Torres nodded grimly. The individual you've been seeing for the past 6 months is a deep cover operative working for a hostile foreign intelligence service. His real name is Alexei Volkov, and he's been running similar operations against federal employees across the Washington metropolitan area. The FBI cyber forensics team had connected their equipment to David's phone and were already pulling data from his communication networks. The lead technician looked up from her laptop screen. Agent Torres, we're seeing active communication threads with at least 12 different individuals. The suspect transmitted the classified documents to multiple recipients approximately 7 minutes ago. Torres activated his radio. This is Control 1. Initiate simultaneous arrests across all identified locations. We have confirmation of intelligence transmission. The scope of the operations suddenly became clear to everyone in the room. This wasn't just about David Hartwell or even Jennifer's compromised relationship. The investigation had uncovered an entire network of foreign operatives and domestic collaborators working to undermine American national security. Jennifer found her voice again, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. He knew exactly what questions to ask about my work. He seemed so interested in helping me become more confident, more willing to challenge unnecessary bureaucracy. That's precisely how social engineering operations work, Torres explained. Foreign intelligence services spend months studying their targets' psychological profiles before making contact. They identify personal vulnerabilities and tailor their approach accordingly. The federal cyber specialist looked up again. Agent Torres, we're getting hits on facial recognition software. The individual known to Ms. Sullivan as Ryan Mitchell has been photographed entering federal buildings across the region using multiple false identities. Torres turned to address the entire room. What we're dealing with here is a sophisticated, multi-layered operation designed to penetrate American security infrastructure through both insider recruitment and social engineering of personnel in positions of authority. Director Morrison struggled to process the information. Are you saying that foreign agents have been systematically targeting federal employees for recruitment? Not recruitment in the traditional sense, Torres replied. Most of the individuals they targeted were never aware they were being manipulated. The goal was to create security vulnerabilities by influencing behavior and decision-making processes. Jennifer's voice was barely audible. He encouraged me to be less paranoid about security protocols. He said excessive caution was holding back my career advancement. The irony was devastating. While Jennifer had been mocking my security assessments as paranoid conspiracy theories, she had been receiving psychological reinforcement for that attitude from a foreign operative, specifically tasked with undermining her professional judgment. Torres continued his explanation. Agent Anderson's investigation identified patterns of behavior indicating that multiple federal employees had been influenced to adopt more relaxed attitudes toward security procedures. This created an environment where legitimate threat assessments were dismissed as unnecessary paranoia. I spoke for the first time since the lockdown began. The network wasn't just gathering intelligence about infrastructure vulnerabilities. They were systematically undermining the institutional culture that would normally identify and respond to those threats. Every head in the room turned toward me. For 18 months, these people had viewed me as a nervous perfectionist who took everything too seriously. Now they were learning that my methodical approach and attention to detail had uncovered a conspiracy that reached far beyond anything they had imagined. Torres's radio crackled with updates from teams across the region. Control 1 Team 3 reporting arrest of Sarah Collins at the Water Authority. She had classified infrastructure documents on her personal computer. Control 1 Team 7 reporting arrest of James Fletcher. Suspect was in possession of emergency communication protocols and evacuation procedures for 3 counties. Control 1 Team 2 reporting arrest of Rachel Price. Financial records confirm payments from shell companies totaling over $100,000. The scope of the network continued to expand with each radio transmission. What had appeared to be a simple case of document mishandling was revealing itself as a comprehensive intelligence operation targeting American critical infrastructure. Jennifer looked up at Torres with a mixture of shame and confusion. How many others were there? How many federal employees were manipulated the same way I was? We've identified at least 18 individuals across 12 different agencies who were targeted through similar social engineering campaigns. Most of them, like you, had no idea they were being manipulated. The federal cyber specialist interrupted again. Agent Torres, we're pulling communications that reference coordinated attacks on infrastructure targets. Based on these messages, the attacks were scheduled to begin within the next 72 hours. Torres's expression became even more serious. The domestic terrorism cell was using the intelligence gathered through this network to plan simultaneous attacks on the electrical grid water treatment facilities and natural gas distribution systems. The goal was to create cascading failures that would affect over 1 million residents. Director Morrison's face went completely white. 1 million people, you're talking about regional catastrophe. That was precisely the intent, Torres confirmed. The Foreign Intelligence Service behind this operation wanted to demonstrate that American infrastructure was vulnerable to coordinated attack. The domestic terrorists they recruited provided the personnel and local knowledge necessary to execute the plan. Jennifer sat in stunned silence as the implications registered. Her relationship with the man she knew as Ryan Mitchell hadn't just compromised her personal life. Her influenced behavior had nearly enabled attacks that could have killed thousands of people and disrupted essential services for an entire metropolitan region. The radio continued providing updates as federal teams executed coordinated arrests across the area. Safe houses were being raided, communication networks were being dismantled, and evidence was being collected that would likely lead to additional arrests and prosecutions. Torres looked around the room, his professional demeanor softening slightly. I want everyone to understand that the individuals who were targeted through social engineering are not being treated as criminals. You were victims of a sophisticated psychological warfare campaign designed by trained intelligence professionals. Jennifer's voice cracked with emotion. But people could have died because I didn't take Brett's report seriously. People are alive because Agent Anderson's investigation provided the intelligence necessary to prevent these attacks, Torres replied. Her patient, methodical approach to documenting security vulnerabilities gave us the evidence we needed to identify and neutralize this network before it could cause catastrophic damage. I felt a complex mixture of vindication and sadness. 18 months of being dismissed and underestimated had finally paid off, but the cost had been enormous. Colleagues I had worked alongside for over a year had been manipulated and deceived. Infrastructure that served millions of people had been targeted for destruction. The federal cyber specialist looked up from her equipment one more time. Agent Torres, we've recovered complete operational plans for all 3 target sites. Based on the timeline in these documents, the first attack was scheduled for tomorrow morning at 6:15 a.m. during the shift change at the electrical substation. Torres nodded grimly. Less than 18 hours. Agent Anderson's decision to activate the security protocol prevented a coordinated terrorist attack with less than 18 hours to spare. The room fell silent as everyone processed that information. My colleagues were learning that their mockery of my paranoid conspiracy theories had nearly enabled a terrorist attack that would have happened before most of them finished their morning coffee. But Torres wasn't finished. He turned to face me directly, his expression shifting from professional detachment to something approaching respect. Agent Anderson, FBI, Assistant Director Hayes is en route from headquarters to personally debrief you on this operation. She's also bringing authorization for a significant change in your operational status. 3 hours after the lockdown began, FBI Assistant Director Patricia Hayes arrived at our regional office like a force of nature. I had met her only twice during my 18 months undercover, but her reputation preceded her into every room she entered. Hayes had built her career on identifying and neutralizing complex national security threats, and her presence signified that our investigation had attracted the highest levels of federal attention. She entered the conference room where I had been waiting, accompanied by 2 senior officials I didn't recognize and Agent Torres. The documents that had triggered this entire crisis were now secured in evidence containers, and the room had been swept for electronic surveillance devices. Agent Anderson, Hayes began without preamble. Your investigation has prevented what our analysts assess would have been the most significant domestic terrorism attack in this region's history. She placed a thick folder on the table between us. The network you uncovered included operatives in 12 federal agencies, 17 municipal governments, and over 30 private contractors with access to critical infrastructure. The coordinated attacks they were planning would have affected over 1.2 million residents and caused economic damage exceeding $8 billion. I struggled to process the scope of what we had prevented. When I first noticed irregularities in David Hartwell's behavior, 18 months ago, I had been investigating what appeared to be a simple case of potential insider threat activity. The reality had been far more complex and dangerous. Hayes continued her briefing. The Foreign Intelligence Service behind this operation has been running similar campaigns in at least 6 other countries. Your methodical documentation provided the first comprehensive map of their methodology and objectives. One of the officials Hayes had brought with her stepped forward. Agent Anderson, I'm Deputy Director William Fraser from the National Counterintelligence and Security Center. Your work has fundamentally changed how we understand and respond to hybrid threats that combine foreign influence operations with domestic terrorism recruitment. The praise felt surreal after 18 months of being dismissed and underestimated by my colleagues. Hayes seemed to understand my emotional state because she sat down across from me and spoke in a more personal tone. Patricia, you've demonstrated exactly the kind of patient, thorough investigation work that modern counterterrorism requires. Foreign adversaries aren't using the same tactics they employed 20 years ago. They're sophisticated, methodical, and focused on long-term psychological warfare rather than dramatic, short-term attacks. She opened the folder and showed me organizational charts that mapped the entire network we had uncovered. Your approach to documenting seemingly minor irregularities over an extended time period allowed us to identify patterns that would have been invisible through conventional investigation methods. Agent Torres added his perspective. Most investigators want quick results and obvious evidence. You understood that complex threats require complex responses. You spent months building a comprehensive picture instead of looking for immediate breakthroughs. Hayes leaned forward, her expression becoming more serious. Which brings me to why I'm here personally. The FBI wants to offer you a supervisory role in our newly expanded counterintelligence division. You would lead a team responsible for developing new methodologies for identifying and neutralizing hybrid threats. The offer was everything I had worked toward during my law enforcement career: supervisory responsibility, recognition for my work. The opportunity to shape how the federal government responded to emerging security challenges. But I found myself hesitating. Ma'am, leading a team would mean leaving hands-on investigation work. The kind of patient, methodical approach that made this operation successful requires investigators who are willing to spend months or years building cases without immediate recognition. Hayes smiled for the first time since entering the room. That's exactly the response I was hoping for. You understand that effective counterterrorism isn't about personal advancement. It's about protecting people who will never know their lives were in danger. Deputy Director Frazier spoke up again. We're not asking you to abandon investigation work entirely. We're proposing a hybrid role where you would continue conducting field operations while also training other investigators in the methodologies you've developed. The possibility intrigued me. Training other investigators meant multiplying the impact of the approach that had proven successful. Instead of being the only person using patient, thorough documentation methods, I could help create an entire generation of investigators who understood the value of methodical work. There's another aspect to this offer, Hayes continued. Your investigation identified significant weaknesses in how federal agencies share information about potential security threats. You would also be responsible for developing improved coordination protocols. I thought about the 18 months I had spent watching institutional arrogance and dismissive attitudes undermine legitimate security assessments. Jennifer's behavior had been problematic, but it reflected broader cultural issues that extended far beyond one individual or one office. Ma'am, the cultural problems that enabled this network to operate successfully can't be fixed through policy changes alone. People need to understand why methodical security work matters, not just be told to take it seriously. Hayes nodded approvingly. Exactly. Which is why we want you to work directly with Jennifer Sullivan and other employees who were targeted through social engineering operations. They can become powerful advocates for security awareness if they understand how their experiences fit into larger patterns. The idea of working with Jennifer initially seemed problematic, but I began to see the potential. Her experience being manipulated by a foreign operative gave her unique insight into how sophisticated influence operations actually functioned. Her institutional knowledge could help identify other employees who might be vulnerable to similar targeting. Torres added another perspective. Jennifer has already volunteered to participate in security awareness training. She wants to help prevent other people from being manipulated the way she was. I looked around the room at the senior federal officials who had come to discuss my future. 6 months ago, I had been a dismissed analyst whose reports were treated as entertainment. Now, I was being offered the opportunity to reshape how America protected itself against sophisticated hybrid threats. But the decision wasn't really about career advancement or personal recognition. Ma'am, if I accept this position, I want to maintain active casework. Training and coordination are important, but the most dangerous threats require investigators who understand how complex operations actually develop over time. Hayes stood up and extended her hand. Agent Anderson, your commitment to hands-on investigation work is exactly why we want you in this role. Too many supervisors lose touch with field realities. We need leaders who understand that effective counterterrorism requires both strategic thinking and tactical expertise. I shook her hand, knowing that I was accepting responsibility for protecting millions of people who would never know my name or understand the nature of the threats we worked to neutralize. Deputy Director Fraser provided the final details. Your new position begins immediately. Your first assignment will be developing training protocols based on this investigation for implementation across all federal agencies with infrastructure security responsibilities. As the meeting concluded, Hayes pulled me aside for a private conversation. Patricia, what you accomplished over the past 18 months represents the best of what federal law enforcement can achieve. You demonstrated that individual integrity and professional excellence can create systemic change that protects entire communities. She paused, choosing her words carefully. But I want you to understand that this kind of work comes with personal costs. The patience and methodical approach that made you successful also means you'll often work alone without recognition on cases that take years to develop. I thought about my father's lessons about courage and integrity. Ma'am, the work is its own reward. Knowing that people are safe because of what we do is more important than external recognition. Hayes smiled. That attitude is exactly why you're the right person for this position. Modern counterterrorism requires investigators who understand that the most important victories are the ones nobody ever hears about. 6 months after the federal lockdown, that changed everything. I stood in a secure conference room at FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C., looking at a wall covered with organizational charts representing hybrid threat networks operating in 17 different states. The methodologies I had developed during my 18 months undercover had become the foundation for a nationwide initiative called the Barrett Protocol, named after my cover surname, to protect my ongoing operational security. The transformation had been remarkable and swift. What began as one investigation in a regional Homeland Security office had evolved into the most comprehensive counterintelligence program in federal law enforcement history. Assistant Director Hayes entered the briefing room, accompanied by Congressional Intelligence Oversight Committee members who had requested a classified briefing on hybrid threat operations. The success of our investigation had attracted attention at the highest levels of government, leading to increased funding and expanded authorities for counterintelligence work. Ladies and gentlemen, Hayes began addressing the assembled lawmakers. The Barrett Protocol has fundamentally changed how we identify and neutralize complex threats that combine foreign influence operations with domestic terrorism recruitment. She gestured toward the organizational charts covering the wall. In the 6 months since implementation, federal investigators using these methodologies have identified hybrid threat networks in 43 cities, prevented 12 planned attacks on critical infrastructure, and arrested over 200 individuals involved in foreign-sponsored domestic terrorism activities. Congressman Bradley from the House Intelligence Committee leaned forward. Assistant Director Hayes, can you explain how this differs from traditional counterterrorism approaches? Hayes looked toward me. Agent Anderson, would you brief the committee on the methodological differences? I stood up, still somewhat uncomfortable with the level of attention my work had attracted, but committed to explaining why patient thorough investigation was essential for modern security challenges. Congressman Bradley, traditional counterterrorism focuses on identifying obvious indicators of imminent threats. The Barrett Protocol emphasizes documenting subtle behavioral patterns and financial irregularities over extended time periods to map complex networks before they become operational. I pointed to one of the organizational charts. The network we uncovered in the initial investigation had been developing for over 3 years before we detected it. Using conventional approaches, we likely wouldn't have identified the threat until after attacks had already occurred. Senator Rodriguez from the Senate Intelligence Committee asked the next question. Agent Anderson, how do you distinguish between legitimate security concerns and paranoid overanalysis? The question struck at the heart of what had made my approach successful. Senator, the key is systematic documentation and evidence-based assessment rather than intuitive judgments. Every concern must be supported by verifiable information and connected to larger patterns of behavior. Hayes added context. The Barrett Protocol requires investigators to build comprehensive evidentiary foundations before drawing conclusions. This prevents both false positives and false negatives that have plagued counterterrorism work in the past. Congressman Williams from the Homeland Security Committee raised another concern. What about the resource requirements for this kind of extended investigation? It sounds extremely labor-intensive, I answered directly. Congressman, the initial investigation required approximately 2,000 hours of analysis over 18 months. The attacks we prevented would have caused over $8 billion in economic damage and potentially hundreds of casualties. The resource investment was minimal compared to the consequences of failure. The mathematical reality was stark and compelling. Patient methodical investigation work was exponentially more cost-effective than responding to successful attacks or trying to rebuild damaged infrastructure. Hayes provided additional context. The Barrett Protocol has also improved our ability to identify foreign influence operations targeting federal employees. We've now documented social engineering campaigns affecting personnel in 67 different agencies. Senator Martinez asked about Jennifer's role in the expanded program. Assistant Director Hayes, what happened to the employee who was manipulated through the fake relationship? Ms. Sullivan has become one of our most effective advocates for security awareness training, I replied. Her personal experience being targeted by foreign operatives gives her unique credibility when explaining how sophisticated influence campaigns actually operate. The transformation of Jennifer's role had been one of the most satisfying aspects of the entire operation. Instead of being destroyed by her experience, she had channeled her knowledge into helping other federal employees recognize and resist similar manipulation tactics. Congressman Bradley asked about international implications. Agent Anderson, have you shared these methodologies with allied intelligence services? Hayes answered that question. Agent Anderson has briefed intelligence officials from 12 allied nations on hybrid threat identification techniques. Several countries have implemented similar protocols and reported significant success in disrupting foreign influence operations. The global scope of the threat required international cooperation. The same foreign intelligence services that had targeted American infrastructure were running parallel operations in Europe, Asia, and Australia. Sharing methodologies multiplied our collective ability to identify and neutralize these threats. Senator Rodriguez raised the most important question. Assistant Director Hayes, what's the long-term prognosis for this type of threat? Are we dealing with an ongoing challenge or a temporary spike in activity? Hayes's expression became serious. Senator, foreign adversaries have recognized that hybrid threats combining influence operations with domestic recruitment represent the most cost-effective method for attacking American interests. We assess that this type of activity will continue increasing in sophistication and scope. I added my perspective. The methodologies we've developed are effective against current threats, but our adversaries are constantly adapting their approaches. Effective counterintelligence requires continuous evolution of investigation techniques and analysis methods. The briefing continued for another hour, covering technical details about investigation procedures, legal authorities, and resource requirements. But the fundamental message was clear. Patient methodical work combined with systematic documentation could prevent catastrophic attacks that conventional approaches would miss entirely. After the congressional delegation left, Hayes and I remained in the briefing room to discuss the next phase of program expansion. Patricia, your work has created a new paradigm for how we think about national security threats. The Barrett Protocol is being taught at the FBI Academy, the CIA's training facility, and military intelligence schools. She paused, looking at the organizational charts that represented thousands of hours of investigative work. But I want to make sure you understand the broader significance of what you've accomplished. Ma'am, we prevented attacks and neutralized networks. That's what investigators are supposed to do. Hayes shook her head. You've done much more than that. You've demonstrated that individual excellence and professional integrity can create institutional change that protects entire communities. Your work has inspired a generation of investigators who understand that methodical patient analysis is the foundation of effective security. The recognition was gratifying, but I remained focused on the work that still needed to be done. Foreign adversaries were already adapting their methodologies in response to our successes. New threats were emerging that would require even more sophisticated investigation techniques. Ma'am, the networks we've disrupted represent only a fraction of the total threat. We need to continue developing our capabilities and training more investigators who understand long-term analysis approaches. Hayes smiled. That's exactly the attitude that made you successful in the first place. You understand that protecting national security is an ongoing responsibility, not a one-time achievement. As I left the briefing room, I reflected on the journey from being mocked in a conference room to briefing congressional oversight committees. The transformation hadn't been about personal advancement or recognition. It had been about demonstrating that careful, thorough work could protect people who would never know their lives had been in danger. That understanding would guide everything I did going forward. 2 years after that humiliating conference room meeting that changed everything, I find myself in a very different place, both professionally and personally. The Barrett Protocol has been implemented across all federal agencies, with infrastructure security responsibilities, and the investigation methodologies I developed have prevented 17 additional terrorist plots targeting critical systems across the country. But the most profound changes have been internal. This morning, I received a text message from Jennifer Sullivan. After completing her voluntary participation in security awareness training, she had accepted a position with the Department of Justice's Office of Intelligence Policy and Review, where she now develops guidelines for protecting federal employees from foreign influence operations. Brett. Her message read, "Just wanted you to know that the training program you designed helped identify another social engineering campaign targeting Treasury Department employees. Your work continues to save lives and protect our national security." The relationship between Jennifer and me has evolved in ways I never could have anticipated. What began as professional antagonism, rooted in institutional arrogance, has become a genuine partnership focused on preventing other people from experiencing the manipulation and deception she endured. Jennifer's transformation demonstrates something crucial about human nature. People can grow from their mistakes when given the opportunity and support to do so. Her experience being systematically deceived by a foreign operative could have destroyed her career and self-confidence. Instead, she chose to channel that knowledge into protecting others from similar manipulation. My father, now 73 and still sharp as ever, calls this turning pain into purpose. During our weekly phone conversations, he often reminds me that the most meaningful work emerges from our willingness to help others avoid the mistakes and tragedies we've witnessed or experienced ourselves. The Barrett Protocol training program has expanded beyond federal law enforcement to include state and local agencies, private sector security professionals, and even university programs focused on homeland security studies. Young investigators across the country are learning that patient, methodical work often produces better results than flashy, dramatic operations. But the personal lessons from this experience extend far beyond professional methodologies. Working 18 months undercover taught me that being underestimated can actually be an advantage. While my colleagues were dismissing my work as boring and paranoid, I was able to conduct thorough investigations without drawing unwanted attention. Sometimes the most important work happens quietly, performed by people whose names never make headlines. The humiliation I felt in that conference room was real and painful. Jennifer's mockery stung because it represented everything I found frustrating about institutional cultures that prioritize style over substance, confidence over competence, and charisma over careful analysis. But that moment of humiliation also represented an opportunity to demonstrate what I truly believed about professional integrity and responsibility. My decision to activate the security alert wasn't just about preventing terrorist attacks, though that was obviously the most important consideration. It was also about standing up for the principle that thorough, methodical work deserves respect and serious attention, regardless of whether it fits comfortable assumptions about how threats should look. The investigation that emerged from that decision proved something crucial. Individual excellence and commitment to doing things correctly can create positive changes that extend far beyond any single case or operation. Today, federal investigators across the country are trained to look for subtle patterns and document seemingly minor irregularities that might indicate complex threats. The cultural shift from dismissing careful analysis to embracing thorough investigation has made America significantly safer from sophisticated hybrid threats. Jennifer often speaks at security conferences about her experience being manipulated through a fake romantic relationship. Her presentations are powerful because they demonstrate how intelligent, successful people can be systematically deceived by trained professionals using sophisticated psychological techniques. I thought I was too smart to fall for something like that. She tells audiences of federal employees and private sector security professionals. But foreign intelligence services don't target stupid people. They target successful individuals in positions of authority because those are the people who can provide access to sensitive information. Her willingness to discuss her experience publicly has helped remove the shame and stigma associated with being targeted by foreign influence operations. Employees who might otherwise hide suspicious approaches now report them to security professionals, creating an additional layer of protection for sensitive information and critical infrastructure. The domestic terrorism network we dismantled in that initial investigation was just one component of a much larger threat ecosystem. Foreign adversaries continue developing new approaches for attacking American interests through influence operations, social engineering, and recruitment of domestic assets. But we're no longer responding to those threats with the institutional arrogance and dismissiveness that nearly enabled catastrophic attacks 2 years ago. The culture shift from mocking careful analysis to embracing methodical investigation has created sustainable improvements in how we identify and neutralize sophisticated threats. My current role allows me to continue hands-on investigation work while also training new investigators and developing improved methodologies for complex cases. It's exactly what I wanted professionally, the opportunity to do important work, while also helping other people develop the skills necessary to protect communities and critical infrastructure. The personal satisfaction comes not from recognition or advancement, but from knowing that the work we do makes a meaningful difference in people's lives. Most Americans will never know how many terrorist attacks have been prevented through patient, methodical investigation. They'll never understand how many foreign influence operations have been neutralized before they could compromise federal employees or critical systems. That anonymity is actually a blessing. It means we're succeeding in our mission to protect people without creating the fear and anxiety that would result from constant public awareness of threats. Jennifer and I have become advocates for what we call quiet heroism, the idea that the most important work is often performed by people who never seek credit or recognition, but simply focus on doing their jobs correctly and thoroughly. The lesson I want people to understand is that professional integrity and attention to detail aren't boring or paranoid traits. They're the foundation of everything that keeps our communities safe and our institutions functioning effectively. Whether you're a federal investigator documenting security vulnerabilities, a teacher preparing lesson plans, a nurse monitoring patient care protocols, or an engineer designing infrastructure systems, the quality of your work affects other people's lives in ways you may never fully understand. Being mocked for taking your responsibilities seriously isn't a sign that you're doing something wrong. Often, it's an indication that you understand something important that other people have chosen to ignore. The most meaningful victories are the ones that prevent problems rather than responding to them after they occur. That requires patient, methodical work performed by people who understand that preventing disasters is more important than receiving credit for heroic responses. My father was right about courage being defined as doing what's right despite being afraid. But he was also right about something else. Integrity isn't about doing what's easy, it's about doing what's necessary even when nobody's watching or appreciating the effort. The humiliation I experienced in that conference room 2 years ago led to the most important work of my professional life. Sometimes our worst moments become the foundation for our greatest contributions. That's a lesson worth remembering, whether you're protecting national security or just trying to do your job correctly in whatever field you've chosen. I'd love to hear about your experiences with workplace cultures that dismiss careful, thorough work. Have you ever been in a situation where doing things correctly was treated as unnecessary paranoia? How did you handle the pressure to cut corners or ignore important details? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your experience might help someone else navigate similar challenges. If this story resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to the channel for more content about finding meaning and purpose in professional life. And share this with someone who might need to hear that their careful, methodical approach to work is valuable and important, even when others don't appreciate it. Thank you for listening to this story about the importance of professional integrity and the power of quiet heroism. Remember that the work you do matters even when, especially when, nobody else seems to notice or care. Stay safe, stay vigilant, and keep doing the important work that makes our communities stronger and more secure.